The moment Luca de Lorenzo's hand closed around hers on that crowded ballroom floor, Evelyn Hart's life split into two distinct halves. The woman she'd been 30 seconds ago, invisible and drowning in debt, and the woman she became when Boston's most dangerous man pulled her into his arms and made her the center of every conversation in the room. She didn't know yet that this single dance would cost her everything she thought she wanted and give her everything she never knew she needed. But in the space between one heartbeat and the next, as his dark eyes found hers and the world went silent around them, the choice was already made. If you want to know how an unemployed editor became the queen of Boston's underworld, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Evelyn's story travels. The Fairmont Crystal Ballroom glittered like a jewelry box turned inside out, all champagne light and careful laughter. The kind of party where everyone knew exactly how much everyone else was worth. Evelyn Hart stood near a marble column at the room's edge, holding a glass of wine she couldn't afford to replace if she spilled it, watching wealthy strangers celebrate causes they'd forget by morning. She shouldn't have come. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, forwarded by her former employer, with a note that said, "Thought you might enjoy this," which really meant, "We feel guilty for laying you off. Here's a pity ticket." Evelyn had almost thrown it away, but rent was 2 months overdue, her freelance work had dried up completely, and some desperate part of her had thought maybe, somehow, being in a room full of Boston's elite might lead to an opportunity. So far, the only opportunity had been to feel spectacularly out of place. Her dress was 5 years old, bought for a job she no longer had. Her shoes pinched. Her carefully applied makeup felt like a mask she didn't quite know how to wear anymore. Around her, women in designer gowns moved like swans, effortless and expensive, while men in custom tuxedos made deals disguised as small talk. Evelyn took a small sip of wine and tried to look like she belonged. "You hate this." The voice came from directly beside her, low and certain. She turned, startled, and found herself looking up at a man who made the rest of the room seem suddenly less impressive. He was tall, dark-haired, probably in his late 30s, with the kind of face that would photograph well, but felt almost dangerous in person. Sharp cheekbones, strong jaw, eyes so dark they were nearly black, watching her with an attention that made her skin prickle. He wore his tuxedo like armor, perfectly tailored, utterly controlled. Everything about him suggested power held carefully in check. "Excuse me?" Evelyn managed. "This party." His mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. "You hate it. You've been standing here for 20 minutes looking like you're calculating the exact moment you can leave without being rude." Evelyn felt her cheeks warm. "I wasn't—" "You were." Now he did smile, and the effect was startling. It softened nothing, but it made him suddenly, intensely human. "It's all right. Most people here are performing. You're just honest about your discomfort." She didn't know what to say to that. Around them, conversations continued, but Evelyn had the strangest sense that the quality of attention in the room had shifted, as though people were watching them without appearing to watch them. Luca de Lorenzo. He extended his hand. Evelyn recognized the name immediately. Everyone in Boston did. The de Lorenzos had been part of the city's fabric for generations. Old money, older power. The kind of family that appeared in society pages and whispered rumors in equal measure. She'd read articles about Luca specifically, philanthropist, real estate developer, patron of the arts. Also, investigated but never charged, connected to organized crime, dangerous to cross. The contradiction stood in front of her, offering his hand. "Evelyn Hart," she said, and shook it. His grip was warm, firm, brief. "What brings you here tonight, Evelyn Hart?" The honest answer, unemployment and desperation, seemed too raw. "Curiosity," she said instead. "About?" "How the other half lives." Something flickered in his expression, gone too quickly to read. "And what have you learned?" "That champagne tastes the same whether you can afford it or not." This time his laugh was genuine, a low sound that seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her. Several heads turned. Evelyn saw a woman in emerald green staring at them with undisguised shock. "Dance with me," Luca said. It wasn't quite a question. Evelyn's first instinct was to refuse. She didn't know this man. She knew of him, which was arguably worse. Everything about him suggested complications she couldn't afford. But his hand was already extended again, patient, and something in his expression made her curious. Not just about him, about herself, about what it would feel like to say yes to something unexpected. "All right," she heard herself say. The moment her fingers touched his palm, the room's energy shifted completely. Luca led her onto the dance floor with the easy confidence of someone who'd never been refused anything. Other couples moved aside without seeming to move, creating space. Evelyn was acutely aware of eyes following them, whispers starting at the room's edges. "Everyone's staring," she murmured as he pulled her into position. "Yes." His hand settled at her waist, warm through the thin fabric of her dress. "Does that not bother you?" "I stopped caring what strangers think a long time ago." He began to move, and she followed automatically, muscle memory from dance classes she'd taken in college. "Does it bother you?" "I don't know yet." They turned smoothly, and Evelyn caught a glimpse of their reflection in the ballroom's mirrored wall, her pale and uncertain, him dark and controlled, the contrast almost stark. "You're a good dancer," Luca said. "So are you." "My mother insisted. She believed certain skills were necessary for maintaining appearances." His tone went dry on the last word. "And are they?" "Useful, occasionally." "Necessary?" He spun her gently, brought her back. "Nothing is necessary except what you choose to make necessary." Evelyn looked up at him, trying to read his expression. "That sounds like a philosophy." "It's experience." The music swelled around them. Something classical and old-fashioned, the kind of song that made Evelyn think of movies about people whose lives were nothing like hers. Except right now, dancing with a man who might be dangerous, wearing a dress she couldn't afford to replace, she felt like she'd stepped into someone else's story. "What do you do, Evelyn Hart?" Luca asked. The question she'd been dreading. "I'm between positions at the moment." "What did you do before you were between positions?" "I was an editor. Books, mostly literary fiction." She paused. "Before that, I wanted to be a writer." "Wanted to be? Past tense?" Evelyn felt something twist in her chest. Practical tense. "Writing doesn't pay rent." "Nothing worth doing pays rent immediately." His hand tightened slightly at her waist, keeping her close as they turned. "What kind of stories did you want to write?" No one had asked her that in years. The question caught her off guard, made her honest. Complicated ones. About people who make difficult choices. About the distance between who we are and who we pretend to be. Luca was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, "Those sound like stories worth reading." "They sound like stories that don't sell." "Perhaps you were showing them to the wrong audience." Before Evelyn could respond, a man in a navy tuxedo appeared at Luca's shoulder, leaning in to murmur something too quiet to hear. Luca's expression didn't change, but Evelyn felt him go very still. "Excuse me one moment," he said, releasing her with obvious reluctance. He stepped aside with the other man, their heads bent together in conversation. Evelyn stood awkwardly at the dance floor's edge, suddenly aware again of being watched. A blonde woman in diamonds caught her eye and looked away quickly, as though Evelyn had done something scandalous just by existing. When Luca returned, less than 2 minutes later, something in him had shifted. He looked the same, moved the same, but Evelyn had the distinct impression of walls going up behind his eyes. "I apologize," he said. "Business." "At a charity gala?" His mouth curved without humor. "Business doesn't stop for parties." "What kind of business are you in, Mr. De Lorenzo?" "The kind that pays rent," he said, echoing her earlier words. They looked at each other for a long moment. The music had changed to something slower, more intimate. Around them, other couples swayed together, but Luca made no move to dance again. "I should let you get back to it," Evelyn said finally. "That's not what I want." The directness of it startled her. "What do you want?" "To keep talking to you." He paused. "Away from here." Evelyn's heart kicked hard against her ribs. Every sensible part of her screamed that this was a bad idea. She didn't know this man. She knew his reputation, which should have been enough to make her refuse. But she was so tired of being sensible, so tired of making careful choices that led nowhere. And something in the way Luca looked at her, like she was real, substantial, interesting, made her want to be reckless just once. "There's a terrace," she said, "through those doors." Luca's smile was slow and genuine. "Show me." The terrace overlooked Boston's glittering skyline, the November air sharp enough to make Evelyn shiver despite her wrap. They were alone except for a security guard stationed discreetly by the door, far enough away to give them privacy. Luca shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over her shoulders before she could protest. It was heavy, expensive, still warm from his body. "Thank you," she said. "You're cold." "I'm always cold. Bad circulation." "Then you need better habits." He leaned against the stone balustrade, studying her with that same intense attention that made her feel simultaneously seen and exposed. "Tell me something true, Evelyn." "That's a dangerous question." "I know." She pulled his jacket tighter, breathing in the scent of expensive cologne and something underneath that was just him. "Why me?" "What do you mean?" "There are 100 women in that room who would love your attention. Beautiful, wealthy, connected women. Why are you out here with someone you just met?" Luca was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from her face to the city beyond. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "Do you know what it's like to be surrounded by people who want something from you? Who smile and laugh and touch your arm, but all of it is performance. All of it is transaction." "No," Evelyn admitted. "I know what it's like to be invisible. Not the same thing." "Closer than you think." He turned back to her. "You looked at me like I was a person, not a name, not a reputation. Just someone who'd interrupted your evening. It's been a long time since anyone looked at me that way." Evelyn's throat felt tight. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you're honest. I know you're here alone, which means you're either brave or desperate, possibly both. I know you think about things carefully before you speak, but when you do speak, you mean it." His mouth curved slightly. "And I know you want to be a writer, but you've convinced yourself it's impractical, which means you're afraid." "That's not—" She stopped, because it was exactly right, and they both knew it. "I'm not criticizing," Luca said quietly. "Fear is reasonable. It's what you do with it that matters." "What do you do with yours?" "I don't have much left to be afraid of." The way he said it made Evelyn's skin prickle. She thought about the articles she'd read, the whispered stories, about family business and missing rivals and investigations that went nowhere, about a man who controlled Boston's underworld while attending charity galas and donating to children's hospitals. "You should be careful," she said, "talking to me like this." "Why?" "Because I don't know how to be anything other than honest, and honesty is dangerous when you're trying to maintain appearances." Luca's expression shifted, something warm and almost surprised crossing his face. "See? That's exactly what I mean." A phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket, glanced at the screen, and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I need to go," he said. Disappointment flashed through her, sharp and unexpected. "Of course. Have dinner with me." Evelyn blinked. "What?" "Tomorrow night. Dinner. Somewhere quiet where we can actually talk." He was already typing something on his phone. "Give me your number." She should refuse. Every logical bone in her body knew she should refuse. She recited her number. Luca entered it, sent a text that made her phone buzz in her clutch. "That's me. I'll pick you up at 7. "You don't know where I live." "Send me your address." He took his jacket from her shoulders, put it back on with quick, efficient movements. "And Evelyn?" "Yes?" "Don't overthink this." Then he was gone, moving back through the terrace doors with the kind of purpose that made people step aside automatically. Evelyn watched him disappear into the crowd, then looked down at her phone. The text was simple. "Looking forward to tomorrow. L." She stood on the terrace for a long time after, looking out at Boston's lights and trying to understand what had just happened. She'd come to this party invisible and desperate. She was leaving with a dangerous man's phone number and the distinct feeling that she'd just made a choice that couldn't be unmade. Her phone buzzed again. This time, the message was longer. "I meant what I said. You should write those complicated stories. The world needs more honesty even when it's uncomfortable, especially then. Evelyn read it twice, then a third time, something warm and terrifying unfolding in her chest. She didn't go back to the party. She collected her coat, ignored the curious stares from the coat check attendant, and walked out into the November night. The cold bit through her thin dress, but she barely felt it. Her apartment was in Alston, a fifth-floor walk-up in a building that had seen better decades. Evelyn climbed the stairs slowly, her feet aching in the too tight shoes, her mind racing. Inside, the apartment was exactly as she'd left it. Small, shabby, filled with books she couldn't bear to sell, even though she probably should. Student loan notices piled on the kitchen counter. Rejection letters from publishers tucked in a drawer. The laptop where she occasionally still tried to write, late at night when she couldn't sleep. Evidence of a life that wasn't working. Evelyn kicked off her shoes, changed into pajamas, made tea she didn't drink. Then she sat on her second-hand couch and pulled out her phone. She should cancel. Text Luca. God, she was already thinking of him as Luca. And tell him she'd made a mistake. That dinner was a bad idea. That she appreciated the conversation, but she wasn't looking for complications. Instead, she opened her laptop. The document was titled Unfinished, a novel she'd been working on 5 years ago, before the practicalities of life had convinced her to give up. She read the first chapter, cringing at the rough prose but remembering the feeling of writing it, the electricity of creation, the sense of building something true. The world needs more honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Evelyn's fingers found the keyboard. She wrote for 3 hours straight, barely aware of time passing, until her tea was cold and the sky outside was starting to lighten. When she finally stopped, she had 4 new pages, rough, imperfect, but alive in a way nothing else in her life felt alive. She saved the document, closed the laptop, picked up her phone. The text she sent was simple. My address is 47 Harvard Avenue, apartment 5B. See you at 7. His response came 30 seconds later. Sleep well, Evelyn. She didn't sleep well. She barely slept at all. But when she finally dozed off around 5 in the morning, she dreamed of dancing in a ballroom that had no walls, just endless space, and a dark-eyed man who held her like she was something precious and dangerous and worth the risk. The next day crawled by in a haze of anxiety and anticipation. Evelyn tried to work. She had a freelance copy editing job due by the end of the week. But she couldn't focus. She read the same paragraph 7 times without retaining a word. At 3 o'clock, she gave up and started getting ready. By 6:30, she'd changed outfits 4 times and was seriously considering canceling. Her best dress, a simple black sheath that had cost half a paycheck 2 years ago, looked worn in the afternoon light. Her makeup felt too heavy, then too light. Her hair wouldn't cooperate. She was a nervous wreck, which was ridiculous. This was just dinner. Just a conversation with an interesting man. Nothing more. Except it felt like more. It had felt like more from the moment his hand touched hers on that dance floor. At 6:45, her buzzer rang. Evelyn's heart jumped into her throat. She pressed the intercom button with a shaking hand. Hello? Evelyn. Oh, Luca's voice, slightly distorted by the old speaker. May I come up? She buzzed him in, then spent the next 2 minutes panicking. Her apartment was a disaster. She should have cleaned. She should have... The knock came firm and certain. Evelyn opened the door. Luca stood in the hallway, dressed more casually than last night, but somehow even more striking. Dark jeans, black sweater, leather jacket. He looked like he belonged in a magazine spread about men who were too dangerous to love but impossible to forget. His eyes moved past her, taking in the small apartment with its peeling paint and secondhand furniture, and Evelyn waited for judgment that never came. Thank you for inviting me up, he said simply. I didn't really. You just said you were coming up. His mouth curved. Would you have preferred I wait in the car? I don't know. She stepped back. Do you want to come in for a minute? I just need to grab my coat. Luca entered, his presence immediately making the small space feel smaller. He moved to the bookshelf that covered one entire wall, his gaze scanning titles with genuine interest. You weren't exaggerating about the books, he said. I have a problem. It's not a problem if it's necessary. He pulled out a worn copy of The Great Gatsby, open to a page marked with a receipt. You annotate. Evelyn felt her cheeks heat. Old habit. Good habit. He read something she'd written in the margin, his expression thoughtful. You see connections most people miss, or I overthink simple sentences. There's no such thing as a simple sentence in Fitzgerald. He slid the book back carefully, exactly where it had been. Ready? Evelyn grabbed her coat, her only good coat, really, and followed him down the narrow stairs. A black car waited at the curb, idling quietly. As they approached, a driver emerged and opened the back door. This is Marco, Luca said. He'll be driving us tonight. Marco nodded politely. He was older, maybe 60, with the kind of face that had seen everything and been surprised by none of it. Inside the car was warm and quiet, the leather seats soft and expensive. Evelyn had never been in a car this nice. She tried not to look impressed and probably failed. Where are we going? She asked as they pulled into traffic. A place I know, quiet, good food. No one will bother us. Do people usually bother you? Usually. They drove through the city as evening settled in, the lights coming on in windows and storefronts, Boston transforming into its nighttime self. Luca didn't fill the silence with small talk, and Evelyn was grateful. She was too aware of him beside her, the warm, solid reality of his presence, the way he occasionally glanced at her as though checking that she was real. The restaurant was in the North End, tucked into a building that looked like it had been there for centuries. No sign outside, just a simple wooden door. Inside was a different world, all warm light and exposed brick. Maybe 10 tables total, most of them empty. An older woman greeted Luca with the kind of familiarity that spoke of long history. Luca, caro, your usual table? Please, Sophia. She led them to a corner booth, partially screened by a decorative partition, private without being isolated. Menus appeared, then wine, then Sophia disappeared with a knowing smile. You come here often, Evelyn observed. Often enough. Sophia and her husband opened this place 40 years ago. The food is excellent, and they value discretion. Should I be worried about needing discretion? Luca's expression turned serious. I want you to feel comfortable, Evelyn. If you'd rather go somewhere more public, no. She surprised herself with the certainty. This is nice. Just different from what I'm used to. What are you used to? Honestly, eating at home alone. Maybe take out once a month if I'm feeling extravagant. Something shifted in his face. Not pity, but something close to understanding. Then let me give you something better than takeout. The food, when it came, was extraordinary. Fresh pasta made that morning. Vegetables roasted with herbs Evelyn couldn't name but wanted to. Wine that tasted like something rare and old and worth saving. They ate and talked, and the conversation flowed more easily than Evelyn had expected. Luca asked about her work, her writing, her life before Boston. She found herself telling him things she rarely shared, about growing up in a small town in Vermont, about her father who died when she was 12, about her mother who'd remarried and moved to Florida and called twice a year out of obligation rather than love. You're alone, Luca said quietly. Mostly. Evelyn took a sip of wine. But I'm used to it. That doesn't make it easier. No, she agreed. It doesn't. Just tell me about the book you're writing. Her hand froze halfway to her glass. How did you started writing last night, didn't you, after you got home? It should have seemed arrogant, that certainty. Instead, it felt intimate, like he'd reached across the table and touched her face. 4 pages, she admitted. Probably terrible. Why probably? Because I haven't written anything real in years. I'm out of practice. Writing is like breathing, Evelyn. You might hold your breath for a while, but eventually you have to do it or you die. The words hit harder than they should have. Evelyn set down her wine, met his eyes directly. Who are you, Luca de Lorenzo? What do you want to know? The truth. His expression went very still. That's a dangerous request. You said I was honest. Maybe I want honesty back. For a long moment, Luca said nothing. Around them, the quiet restaurant hummed with subdued conversation, the clink of silverware, the soft murmur of Sophia talking to another patron. But in their corner booth, the world narrowed to just the two of them. My family has been in Boston for 4 generations, Luca said finally. My great-grandfather came from Sicily with nothing and built an empire through hard work and harder choices. My grandfather expanded it, my father maintained it, and I inherited all of it when he died 15 years ago. What kind of empire? The kind that exists in shadows, the kind that doesn't appear on tax forms or business registrations. His gaze never left hers. The kind that makes money in ways your complicated stories might explore, but most people prefer to ignore. Evelyn's heart was pounding, but she didn't look away. Are you telling me you're a criminal? I'm telling you that power in this city doesn't come from playing by rules written by people who were born into privilege. I'm telling you that I do what's necessary to protect what's mine and the people who depend on me. He leaned forward slightly. I'm telling you that I'm not a good man, Evelyn, but I'm an honest one, at least with you. She should stand up, walk out. This was the moment any sensible person would leave. Instead, she asked, "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you asked for truth. And because if we continue this, whatever this is, you deserve to know what you're walking into." "And what am I walking into?" "I don't know yet." His voice went quieter, rougher. "But I want to find out, if you'll let me." Evelyn looked at him, this beautiful, dangerous, unexpectedly honest man who'd appeared in her life like a storm she hadn't seen coming, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. She thought about her empty apartment, her failing career, her safe, small, suffocating life. She thought about the 4 pages she'd written last night, the electricity of creating something real. She thought about standing on that terrace, in the cold, wrapped in his jacket, feeling seen for the first time in years. "I'm afraid," she said. "Good. Fear means you're paying attention." "I don't know what I'm doing." "Neither do I," Luca admitted, "but I'd like to figure it out together, if you're willing." Evelyn took a deep breath and made a choice. "I'm willing." The smile that crossed Luca's face was worth every risk she was taking. They stayed at the restaurant until Sophia gently suggested they might enjoy the rest of the evening elsewhere. Outside, the November night was cold and clear, Boston glittering around them like a promise. "Let me take you home," Luca said. In the car, he sat close enough that she could feel his warmth, far enough to give her space. His hand rested on the seat between them, and after a moment, Evelyn reached over and laced her fingers through his. Luca's hand tightened, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. When they reached her building, he walked her to the door. "Thank you for tonight," Evelyn said. "Thank you for taking a chance on me." They stood in the cold, breath misting between them, and Evelyn realized she didn't want him to leave. She wanted to invite him upstairs, wanted to keep talking until dawn, wanted to know everything about this man who'd walked into her life and turned it sideways. But something held her back. Maybe caution, maybe instinct. This thing between them felt fragile and new, worth protecting. "Will I see you again?" she asked. Luca reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with gentle fingers. "Tomorrow, if you'll have me, and the day after that, and the day after that until you tell me to stop. That might be a while." "Good." He leaned in, pressed a kiss to her forehead, chaste, sweet, devastating. "Sleep well, Evelyn Hart." "You too, Luca de Lorenzo." She watched him return to the car, watched it pull away into the night. Then she climbed the 5 flights to her apartment and immediately opened her laptop. She wrote until 3 in the morning, the words pouring out faster than she could type, the story taking shape like something inevitable. And when she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of dancing again. But this time, the ballroom had walls made of books, and when Luca spun her around, she could see their whole future written in the margins. The next 3 weeks unfolded like a fever dream Evelyn wasn't sure she wanted to wake from. Luca called the next morning while she was still in bed. Her laptop opened beside her with another 5 pages written in the pre-dawn hours. His voice was warm, slightly rough, like he'd just woken up himself. "Good morning." "Good morning," she echoed, suddenly shy. "I was thinking about you." "Were you?" "I was thinking about how you annotate books, how you see connections other people miss." A pause. "I was thinking I'd like to see you today." Evelyn's heart did something complicated in her chest. "I have work, freelance editing due by Friday." "Tonight, then. Let me make you dinner." "You cook?" I do many things that might surprise you. She could hear the smile in his voice. Say yes, Evelyn. She should maintain boundaries, create space, protect herself from moving too fast into something that already felt too big to control. Yes, she said. He picked her up at 7 in the same black car, but this time he directed Marco to the south end, to a brownstone that looked like it had been standing since Boston was young. Inside the apartment was nothing like Evelyn had expected. No ostentatious displays of wealth, no cold minimalism. Instead, it felt lived in, warm. Books on shelves, art on walls that looked collected rather than purchased, a kitchen that showed signs of actual use. You seem surprised, Luca said, watching her take it in. I expected something different. More stereotypically criminal? His tone was dry. More empty, she admitted. This feels like a home. Something shifted in his expression, pleasure and pain mixed together. It is, or it's trying to be. He cooked pasta from scratch, his hands confident and practiced, and Evelyn sat at the kitchen island drinking wine and asking questions she probably shouldn't ask. Where did you learn to cook? My grandmother. She believed a man who couldn't feed himself was only half alive. What else did she believe? That family was everything, that loyalty was currency, that the world was divided into people you protected and people you didn't trust. He glanced up from chopping garlic. She was complicated. Like your stories? Exactly like my stories. They ate at a small table by the window overlooking the street, and the conversation flowed the way it had the night before. Easy, deep, punctuated by silences that felt comfortable rather than awkward. Luca asked about her writing, and Evelyn found herself telling him about the novel, about the characters taking shape, about the fear that she'd forgotten how to do this. You haven't forgotten, Luca said. You just convinced yourself it didn't matter. There's a difference. How do you know? Because I see it in your face when you talk about it. You come alive. After dinner, he showed her his library, a room lined floor to ceiling with books, first editions mixed with worn paperbacks, the collection of someone who actually read rather than displayed. This is incredible, Evelyn breathed. I'm glad you think so. Luca pulled down a volume, handed it to her. This was my father's. He marked passages he wanted to remember. It was Dante, the Inferno, annotations in the margins in Italian. Evelyn ran her fingers over the handwriting, feeling the weight of intimacy in the gesture, being shown something that mattered. What does this say? She pointed to a note beside a particularly marked passage. Luca leaned close to read it, his shoulder brushing hers. The path to paradise begins in hell. He was quiet for a moment. He wrote that 6 months before he died. How did he die? A heart attack, officially. Luca took the book back, returned it to its place with careful hands. Really, the weight of choices he couldn't undo. Evelyn wanted to ask more, but something in his posture suggested the topic was closed. Instead, she said, "Thank you for showing me this. Thank you for wanting to see it." When he took her home that night, he walked her upstairs to her door, kissed her forehead again, still chaste, still devastating, and left her aching for more. The pattern repeated. Dinner the next night and the night after that. Long conversations that stretched past midnight. Luca showing her pieces of his life. The restaurant where his grandfather used to meet associates. The church where his mother was buried. The boxing gym where he went to think when the weight of business got too heavy. I shouldn't be telling you these things, he said one night as they walked along the harbor, the cold wind cutting through their coats. Why not? Because knowing too much about my life makes you vulnerable. Evelyn stopped walking, turned to face him. I'm already vulnerable, Luca. The moment I said yes to dinner, I became vulnerable. You don't get to decide that for me. He looked at her for a long moment, something fierce and tender in his expression. Then he pulled her close and kissed her properly for the first time, deep and claiming and absolutely certain, his hands framing her face like she was something precious. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Evelyn's world had tilted again. I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you at that party, Luca said roughly. What took you so long? I was trying to be a gentleman. Maybe I don't want a gentleman. His laugh was low and surprised. Careful what you wish for, Evelyn Hart. But despite the kiss, despite the heat building between them, Luca never pushed for more. He never invited himself into her apartment, never suggested she stay at his place. It should have been frustrating. Instead, it made Evelyn want him more. This man who could have anything he wanted but chose restraint, chose to let her set the pace. 2 weeks in, she realized she was falling in love with him. The recognition came while she was editing a manuscript about a woman making impossible choices, and suddenly all she could think about was Luca's hands, Luca's voice, the way he looked at her like she was the only real thing in his carefully constructed world. It terrified her. That night, when he called, because he called every night now, just to hear her voice before sleep, she almost told him, almost said the words that were building pressure in her chest. Instead, she asked, "What are we doing, Luca?" "What do you mean?" "This. Us. What is this?" Silence on the other end, long enough that Evelyn's heart started to race with panic. Then, "I don't have a word for it yet, but I know I think about you constantly. I know I want to know everything about you. I know that when I'm with you, I feel like a better version of myself than I've been in years." A pause. "Is that enough of an answer?" "For now," she whispered. "What do you want this to be, Evelyn?" "Something real." "Then it's real." His voice was certain, final. "Whatever else it becomes, it's real." 3 weeks after the gala, Evelyn's carefully balanced world began to crack. It started with small things. A black car parked outside her building that she didn't recognize. The sense of being watched when she went to the coffee shop. A man in a suit who seemed to follow her for 3 blocks before disappearing. She told herself it was paranoia, stress, the natural anxiety of being involved with someone like Luca. She didn't mention it to him. Then Marco appeared at her door on a Thursday afternoon. "Miss Hart." He was polite, professional, but there was tension in his shoulders. "Mr. De Lorenzo asked me to bring you to him." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "Is something wrong?" "He'll explain, please. It's important." The drive took them to a building she'd never seen before, industrial and anonymous, in a part of the city Evelyn didn't recognize. Marco led her through a side entrance, up a service elevator, into a hallway that smelled like concrete and old metal. Luca was in what looked like an office, standing by a window with his phone pressed to his ear. When he saw her, relief flashed across his face so intensely it was almost painful to witness. He ended the call mid-sentence. "Evelyn, thank God." "What's going on?" Marco said, "Come here." He crossed the room in 3 strides, pulled her into his arms, and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Are you all right? Did anyone approach you today? Follow you?" "I don't... What?" "Luca, you're scaring me." He pulled back enough to look at her face, his hands on her shoulders. "Someone has been watching you, taking pictures. I need to know if anyone tried to talk to you, threatened you." "No, no one." Evelyn's heart was hammering. "Why would someone be watching me?" Luca's jaw tightened. "Because of me. Because being seen with me makes you a target for people who want to hurt me." The reality of what he was saying settled over her like ice water. She'd known abstractly that Luca's life was dangerous, that his business existed in shadows, but knowing it and feeling it were completely different things. "Who's watching me?" "A rival family, the Castellanos. They've been trying to move into territory I control, and they think..." He stopped, his expression going dark. "They think you're leverage." Evelyn pulled away from his grip, needing space to think. "Leverage. Something they can use against me, someone I care about." "And do you? Care about me?" "Evelyn, because if I'm just another piece on your chessboard, Luca, I need to know now." He looked like she'd slapped him. "Is that what you think this is?" "I don't know what this is. 3 weeks ago I was nobody, invisible, drowning in debt. Then you appeared and everything changed, and it's been wonderful and terrifying, and now I'm being followed by criminals because I'm leverage." "You're not leverage." Luca's voice cut through her spiral, sharp and certain. "You're the first thing I've cared about in years that isn't obligation or strategy. You're the reason I've started thinking about what I want instead of just what I have to do. And yes, that makes you vulnerable, and I hate that, but don't you dare reduce yourself to a piece on a board." Evelyn stared at him, breathing hard, emotions churning too fast to sort. "I'm sorry," Luca said more quietly. "I should have told you this could happen. I should have protected you better. This is my fault. What happens now? Now I make sure you're safe. I've already tripled security on your building. Marco will drive you anywhere you need to go. And I've sent a message to the Castellanos that touching you would be the last mistake they ever make. You're talking about violence. I'm talking about protection. It's the same thing in your world, isn't it? Luca didn't deny it. Yes. Evelyn walked to the window, looked out at the gray Boston afternoon, trying to order her thoughts. Behind her, she could feel Luca waiting, tense and silent. I need you to be honest with me, she said finally. Completely honest. What do you do exactly? What kind of business are we talking about? Evelyn, no. She turned to face him. You told me you were honest. You said if we continued this, I deserved to know what I was walking into. So tell me, all of it. For a long moment, Luca said nothing. Then he moved to the desk, poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter and handed her one. My family controls most of the organized crime in Boston, he said. We have for 3 generations. Gambling, some controlled substances, protection services, unions. We launder money through legitimate businesses, restaurants, real estate, construction. We have judges on payroll, police who look the other way, politicians who owe us favors. Evelyn took a sip of whiskey, the burn steadying her. Have you killed people? I've given orders that resulted in deaths. I've defended myself and my people when necessary. I've made choices that kept me awake at night. His gaze never wavered from hers. I'm not asking you to forgive that or accept it. I'm just being honest. Why? Because you asked, because I'm tired of pretending, because with you, I want to be something closer to the truth. Evelyn set down her glass, her hand shaking slightly. I should walk away. Yes. Any sensible person would walk away. Yes. But I don't want to. The words came out raw, honest. I don't want to walk away from you, Luca, and I don't know if that makes me brave or stupid. He crossed to her, his movements careful like he was approaching something wild and easily spooked. It makes you human. What if I can't handle this? What if I wake up one day and realize I've made a terrible mistake? Then I'll let you go. His hands came up to frame her face, gentle and sure. I won't like it, but I'll let you go, Evelyn. I need you to know that. You're not trapped here. You can walk away any time. Can I? She looked up at him. Because it doesn't feel like I can. It feels like you've gotten under my skin and into my head, and I don't know how to extract you without tearing myself apart. Luca's expression cracked, something vulnerable and desperate showing through. I feel the same way. So what do? We figure it out together. We take it one day at a time, and I promise you, I will do everything in my power to keep you safe. Evelyn leaned into his touch, let herself be held, let herself stop thinking for just a moment. But even as his arms came around her, she couldn't shake the feeling that safety was an illusion, and that choosing to stay meant choosing danger, permanently and irrevocably. When Marco drove her home that night, there was a second car following them. Security, Luca had said. Protection. Evelyn watched the headlights in the side mirror and tried to reconcile the man who cooked her dinner and quoted Dante with the man who gave orders that resulted in deaths. The contradiction should have repelled her. Instead, it made her want to understand him more. She wrote until dawn, the words pouring out faster than ever, her novel taking shape around a woman who fell in love with a man made of contradictions. Fiction, she told herself. Just fiction. But when Luca called the next morning, his voice warm and slightly rough, asking if she'd slept well, Evelyn knew she was lying to herself. This wasn't fiction. This was her life now. And terrifying as it was, she wasn't ready to give it up. The next week, Luca took her to a private art gallery opening, not the kind announced in papers, but the kind where admission required knowing someone who knew someone. Evelyn wore a dress Luca had sent her, midnight blue silk that fit like it had been made for her body. When she'd protested the expense, he'd simply said, "Let me do this." And she'd been too overwhelmed to argue. At the gallery, people looked at her differently than they had at the charity gala. Not with curiosity, but with calculation. Women assessed her with narrowed eyes. Men nodded at Luca and ignored her completely, or studied her too closely, making inventories. They're trying to figure out who you are, Luca murmured in her ear as they looked at a painting neither of them was really seeing. What do they think? Some think you're a distraction. Others think you're a weakness they can exploit. A few understand you're neither. What are you telling them? His hand settled at the small of her back, possessive and warm. Nothing. What we are is none of their business. But it became their business when a man in an expensive suit approached them near the sculpture exhibit. He was older, maybe 50, with silver hair and the kind of face that had probably been handsome before cruelty hardened it. Luca. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I didn't expect to see you here. Vincent. Luca's voice went carefully neutral. I could say the same. Business brings me everywhere these days. Expanding operations, you understand. His gaze shifted to Evelyn, assessing. And who is this lovely creature? Someone you don't need to know. Vincent's smile widened. Protective already? She must be special. She is, which is why this conversation is over. Luca guided Evelyn away, his hand firm at her back, but she could feel the tension radiating through him. Who was that? She asked when they were out of earshot. Vincent Castellano, the man whose family has been watching you. Evelyn's stomach dropped. He's here? Sending a message, letting me know he can get close whenever he wants. Luca, it's fine. We're in public, surrounded by witnesses. He won't try anything here. But his jaw was tight, his eyes scanning the room constantly. They left early, Luca's mood dark and distant during the drive home. When they reached her building, he walked her upstairs, checked her apartment himself. Closets, windows, the fire escape, before seeming to relax slightly. I'm sorry, he said. For what? For bringing you into this. For making you a target. For... He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. For being selfish enough to keep you, even though I know I shouldn't. Evelyn stepped closer, took his face in her hands the way he'd done to her so many times. I'm choosing this, Luca. I'm choosing you. Stop trying to make my decisions for me. You don't understand what you're choosing. Then help me understand. Show me your world, all of it, so I can decide with my eyes open. He looked at her for a long moment, searching her face for something. Then he kissed her, not gentle this time, but hungry and desperate, weeks of restraint finally breaking. Evelyn kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. They stumbled backward until her shoulders hit the wall, and Luca's hands were in her hair, on her waist, everywhere at once. Evelyn, he breathed against her mouth, tell me to stop. Why would I do that? Because if I don't stop now, then don't stop. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. Stay. Tonight. Stay with me. His control shattered visibly. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. He kissed her again, slower this time, but no less intense, and Evelyn felt the last of her reservations dissolve. This was real. He was real. And whatever came next, they'd face it together. Later, tangled in her sheets with the city lights filtering through the window, Luca traced patterns on her shoulder and told her things he'd never told anyone. About his father's death, about inheriting an empire at 23, about the weight of being responsible for hundreds of people whose livelihoods depended on his decisions. I never wanted this life, he said quietly. I wanted to be an architect. Did you know that? No. I was going to design buildings, create something beautiful and permanent. Instead, I maintain an empire built on fear and loyalty and money that's always dirty no matter how many times you wash it. Evelyn turned to face him, studied his profile in the dim light. You could leave. And let it fall apart? Let everyone who depends on me lose everything? He shook his head. I made a promise to my father. Some promises you can't break. Even if they're killing you? Even then. She didn't have an answer for that. Instead, she pressed closer, let him hold her, and tried not to think about what morning would bring. When she woke, Luca was already dressed, standing by her window with his phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low, controlled, but Evelyn could hear the steel underneath. I don't care what it costs. I want them gone by the end of the week. No, I'm done negotiating. They made their choice when they started following her. Then make it clear, very clear. He ended the call, noticed she was awake. His expression softened immediately. Good morning. Is everything okay? It will be. He came to sit on the edge of the bed, brushed hair from her face. I'm handling the Castellano situation. You don't need to worry. How are you handling it? In ways you probably don't want to know about. Evelyn sat up, pulling the sheet around herself. I meant what I said last night. I want to know. All of it. Luca studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed. I'm forcing them out of Boston. Every business they have here, every connection, every source of income. I'm cutting them off. By the end of the month, they'll have no choice but to leave or face a war they can't win. Will they leave? They'll leave. How can you be sure? Because I'm very good at making the alternative worse than compliance. The certainty in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, Evelyn found it almost comforting. This man who would reshape the criminal landscape of an entire city to keep her safe. She was definitely in too deep. I need to tell you something, she said. What? My novel, the one I'm writing. It's about us. Luca's eyebrows rose. Us? Not exactly us, a fictionalized version. A woman who falls in love with a man whose life is built on contradictions. A relationship that shouldn't work but somehow does. She met his eyes. Is that okay? He was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he smiled, a real smile, surprised and genuine. Are you going to make me the villain? I don't know yet. I'm still figuring out if you're the villain or the hero. What if I'm both? Then it'll be a more honest story than most. Luca leaned in, kissed her softly. Write whatever truth you find, Evelyn. I trust you. Those 3 words, I trust you, felt more significant than any declaration of love. In Luca's world, trust was currency, and he'd just given her everything. She kissed him back, pulling him down into the warmth of her bed, and for a little while longer they pretended the outside world didn't exist. But it did exist, and it was about to crash into their carefully constructed bubble in ways neither of them could have anticipated. The crash came on a Tuesday night, exactly 4 weeks and 3 days after Evelyn had first danced with Luca in that glittering ballroom. She was at his place, curled up in his library with her laptop, working on Chapter 12 while he handled business in his office down the hall. It had become their routine. She wrote while he worked, and then they'd come together for dinner, for conversation, for the intimacy that had become as necessary as breathing. The novel was really taking shape now, nearly 40,000 words of complicated truths wrapped in fiction. Her protagonist was falling deeper into a world she didn't understand, falling harder for a man who terrified and fascinated her in equal measure. Evelyn knew she was writing her own story, barely disguised, but she didn't care anymore. This was the most honest thing she'd ever created. She was mid-sentence when she heard raised voices from Luca's office. Not unusual, his business often involved heated conversations. But then something shattered, glass breaking, and Luca's voice cut through sharp and dangerous in a way she'd never heard before. Evelyn saved her work and moved quietly toward the office. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap she could see Luca standing behind his desk, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand braced on the mahogany surface like he needed the support. When? His voice was ice. How many casualties? A pause, his jaw clenching. No, you listen to me. I want every camera feed from that block. I want witnesses found and questioned. I want to know who gave the order, and I want them in front of me by morning. Another pause. I don't care if it's impossible. Make it possible. He ended the call and threw his phone onto the desk with enough force that Evelyn flinched. For a moment he just stood there, breathing hard, his shoulders rigid with barely controlled fury. Then he seemed to sense her presence. His head turned and the look on his face made her heart stop, raw pain mixed with rage. The careful control he always maintained completely stripped away. What happened? Evelyn asked quietly. There was an attack. One of my clubs in Dorchester. Someone threw a Molotov through the window during operating hours. His voice was flat, emotionless, which was somehow worse than anger. 3 people are in the hospital. One of them is Carlo, my head of security. He was there checking on things because I asked him to increase patrols. Evelyn's hand went to her throat. Oh my God, Luca, this is my fault. He wasn't looking at her anymore, staring instead at something only he could see. I pushed too hard against the Castellanos. I thought I could force them out cleanly, but Vincent doesn't do clean. He does brutal. He does public statements. This was the Castellanos? Who else? Luca's laugh was bitter. He's sending a message, showing me he can hurt my people, destroy my property, and I can't stop him without starting an all-out war. Evelyn moved into the room, her instinct to comfort warring with uncertainty about whether he'd want her near him right now. What are you going to do? What I have to. He finally looked at her, and the coldness in his eyes made her shiver. I'm going to end this. Tonight. Luca, wait. I can't wait, Evelyn. Every hour I wait is another hour Vincent thinks he has leverage. Another hour he might hurt someone else I care about. His gaze intensified. Another hour you're in danger. Me? This wasn't about me. Everything is about you now. Don't you understand? Vincent knows the fastest way to hurt me is through you. The club was just the opening move, a demonstration of what he's willing to do. Evelyn felt cold seep into her bones. What does that mean? It means I need to handle this before it escalates further. Luca was already moving, grabbing his jacket from the back of his chair. Marco will take you home. There will be 2 guards outside your building tonight. Don't leave for any reason. Don't answer the door for anyone except me. Where are you going? To have a conversation with Vincent Castellano. The way he said conversation made it clear he meant something much more violent. Evelyn grabbed his arm as he moved past her. Don't do this. I have to. No, you don't. You could call the police. The police? Luca's expression would have been funny if it wasn't so devastating. Evelyn, the police can't help me. Half of them are on my payroll, the other half pretend not to see what happens in the shadows. This isn't a world where you call for help. This is a world where you handle your own problems. By doing what? Killing him? Luca didn't answer, which was answer enough. Listen to me. Evelyn moved in front of him, forced him to look at her. I know I don't understand your world. I know I'm naive about how things work in your business. But I know you, Luca. And I know that if you do this, if you kill someone in cold blood, it will change you. It will change us. It's already changed us. His voice was rough. The moment they threw that bomb, the moment Carlo got hurt because of decisions I made, it all changed. So change it back. Find another way. There is no other way. There's always another way. You're just too angry to see it right now. She cupped his face in her hands, made him focus on her. Please, don't go. Not like this. Not when you're this angry. For a moment, she thought she'd reached him. Something flickered in his eyes, the cold fury banking slightly. His hands came up to cover hers, his touch gentle despite the violence coiled in every line of his body. You make me want to be better than I am, he said quietly. You are better than this. No. He pulled her hands down, kissed her knuckles. I'm exactly this, Evelyn. I'm the man who gives orders that result in deaths. I'm the man who controls through fear and force. I'm the man my father raised me to be, and tonight I need to be that man completely. He stepped back, breaking contact, and Evelyn felt the distance between them like a physical wound. Marco will take you home, he repeated. I'll call you when it's done. Then he was gone, leaving Evelyn standing in his office, her heart racing and her mind screaming that she should stop him, do something, anything. But what could she do? She was a writer, an editor, a woman whose life had been small and safe until a month ago. She had no power here, no leverage, no way to influence the trajectory of violence that had already been set in motion. Marco appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. Miss Hart, we should go. The drive back to her apartment was silent. Evelyn stared out the window at Boston sliding past, the city that had seemed so full of possibility a month ago now, feeling dangerous and alien. She thought about Luca's face, the cold fury, the absolute certainty that violence was the only answer. She thought about loving him despite that certainty. At her building, 2 men in dark suits stood by the entrance, exactly as Luca had promised. They nodded at Marco, acknowledged Evelyn with professional courtesy, and she felt simultaneously protected and trapped. Inside her apartment, Everything looked exactly as she'd left it that morning. Laptop on the kitchen table, coffee cup in the sink, her life frozen in a moment before everything tilted sideways again. She thought about the novel on her computer, about her protagonist making similar impossible choices. Fiction was so much simpler than reality. Evelyn tried to write. She opened her laptop, pulled up the document, stared at the cursor blinking in the middle of a sentence about love and danger intersecting. But the words wouldn't come. All she could think about was Luca confronting Vincent Castellano, about what conversation meant in a world built on violence. She closed the laptop, made tea she didn't drink, paced her small apartment like a caged animal. At midnight, her phone rang. "Hello?" Her voice came out shaky. "It's handled." Luca sounded tired, so tired. "It's over." "What did you do?" "What needed to be done? The Castellanos are leaving Boston. They have 72 hours to close up their operations and disappear. If they're still here after that, there will be consequences." "Luca, I didn't kill him, if that's what you're asking. But I made it very clear what would happen if he ever came near you, or my people, or my businesses again." Evelyn sank onto her couch, relief and residual fear making her shaky. "Are you okay?" "No." The honesty in his voice cracked something open in her chest. "But I will be. Can I come over?" "Please." He arrived 20 minutes later, and when Evelyn opened the door, she almost didn't recognize him. He looked hollowed out, exhausted in a way that went deeper than physical tiredness. There was blood on his knuckles, not much, but enough to tell a story. "You're hurt," she said. "It's nothing." She pulled him inside, led him to the bathroom, made him sit on the edge of the tub while she cleaned his hands with gentle efficiency. The cuts weren't deep, already starting to scab over, but she treated them carefully anyway, needing to do something tangible to help. "I'm sorry," Luca said quietly as she wrapped gauze around his knuckles. "For what?" "For dragging you into this. For making you worry. For being exactly what you were afraid I was." Evelyn finished securing the bandage, then sat back on her heels to look at him. "What happened tonight?" "I went to Vincent's warehouse. I brought enough men to make a statement. We had a conversation about boundaries and consequences. He tried to posture, to act like he still had leverage, so I showed him he didn't." "How?" "Does it matter?" "Yes. I need to know who I'm choosing, Luca. All of it." He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. Then he said, "I broke his nose, dislocated his shoulder, made him understand that touching anything of mine would cost him more than he was willing to pay. Then I gave him the ultimatum, leave Boston or face a war he couldn't win. And he agreed? He didn't have a choice. I had 40 men with me. He had 12. The math was simple." Luca looked down at his bandaged hands. "But you were right. It did change something. Standing there, hurting someone, not because I had to, but because I wanted to make a point. That's not who I thought I was anymore." "Who did you think you were?" "Someone better. Someone worth the way you look at me." His voice cracked slightly. "Someone who could keep his hands clean." Evelyn reached up, turned his face toward her. "Your hands were never clean, Luca. You told me that yourself. But that doesn't mean you're irredeemable. It means you're human." "Human," he repeated, like the word was foreign. "Yes, complicated and flawed and capable of both violence and tenderness, just like everyone else, just on a different scale. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's true." She stood, pulled him up with her. "Come to bed." They didn't make love that night. Instead, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Luca's head on her chest, her fingers running through his hair in soothing patterns. He told her about his father, about inheriting the family business at 23, about the first time he'd ordered someone hurt, and how he'd thrown up afterward. "It gets easier," he said. "That's what terrifies me. Each time, it gets a little easier to make those choices, a little easier to live with the consequences." "Then maybe you need to start making different choices." "What kind of choices?" "Ones that don't require violence, ones that build something instead of destroying it." Luca lifted his head to look at her. "You think I can do that?" "I think you're already doing it. You support the arts, you fund community programs, you employ hundreds of people legally. That's real, Luca. That matters. It doesn't erase the rest." "No, but it means you're capable of more than just maintaining an empire. You're capable of changing it." He was quiet, processing. Then he said, "What if I can't? What if I'm too deep in this life to ever get out?" "Then we figure out how to live with it, together." "You'd stay, even knowing what I am, what I've done?" Evelyn thought about it honestly, not giving him easy comfort but real truth. "I don't know if I can stay forever. I don't know if loving you is sustainable or if eventually the danger and the violence will break me. But I know I want to try. I know that when I imagine my life without you in it, it feels empty in a way it didn't before I met you." Luca pulled her down into a kiss that tasted like gratitude and desperation, and promises neither of them was sure they could keep. When they broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I will do everything I can to be worthy of that," he said. "I promise you." "Don't make promises you might not be able to keep." "Then I promise to try. That much I can do." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and Evelyn dreamed of buildings Luca designed instead of empires he maintained, beautiful and permanent and clean. The next morning, Evelyn woke to find Luca already awake, propped up on one elbow, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "How long have you been staring at me?" she asked, her voice rough with sleep. "Long enough to convince myself you're real." She reached up, traced the line of his jaw. "I'm real. I know. It's still hard to believe sometimes." He caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about making different choices. And I want to show you something. Today, if you're willing." Evelyn sat up, curious. "Show me what?" "The other side of my life. The part that isn't violence and fear. The part I've been building quietly for years." He smiled slightly. "The part I hope might matter more, eventually." An hour later, they were in Luca's car. He was driving this time, no Marco, just the two of them, heading toward a part of Boston Evelyn didn't know well. The neighborhood was working class, the buildings showing their age. But there was life here, vibrancy in the people on the sidewalks and the small businesses lining the streets. Luca pulled up in front of a community center, newer than the buildings surrounding it, bright and clean and welcoming. "This is one of mine," he said as they got out. "I funded the construction 5 years ago. It offers after-school programs, job training, legal aid services, all free to anyone in the neighborhood." Inside, the center was busy with activity. Kids doing homework in a tutoring room, adults in a computer class, someone teaching a cooking workshop in a large kitchen. A woman in her 50s spotted Luca and smiled broadly. "Mr. De Lorenzo, we weren't expecting you today." "Just showing a friend around, Maria. How are things?" "Wonderful. We just filled all the slots for the winter job training program. 80 people signed up." Maria's pride was evident. "And the after-school program has a waiting list now." "That's excellent. Let me know if you need more funding to expand capacity." They talked for a few more minutes, Maria updating him on various programs, and Evelyn watched Luca transform. The hardness that usually lived in his shoulders eased. His smile became genuine, unguarded. This was what mattered to him, she realized. Not the power or the fear, but this, making a tangible difference in people's lives. After touring the community center, Luca took her to a small restaurant he owned that employed people with criminal records who couldn't get jobs elsewhere, then to a housing development he'd financed that provided affordable apartments for families displaced by gentrification. "This is what I meant," he said as they stood on the sidewalk outside the housing development. "This is what I want to build more of, real things that help real people, not just revenue streams or power bases." Evelyn looked up at the building, at the laundry hanging from windows and bikes locked on railings and all the evidence of actual lives being lived. "Why don't you talk about this more?" "Because in my world, showing you care about something makes it a target. Vincent would burn that community center to the ground if he thought it would hurt me." Luca's jaw tightened. "That's why I keep these things quiet. Why I wrote the funding through shell corporations and intermediaries. If people don't know I care, they can't use it against me." "That's a lonely way to live." "It's a safe way to live. For you, maybe. But what about the cost to your soul?" Luca turned to look at her, something shifting in his expression. "You sound like my grandmother. She used to say that a man who protects his heart so carefully he never uses it ends up with nothing worth protecting." She sounds wise. She was. She also believed in family above everything, which is how I ended up running an empire I never wanted. He took Evelyn's hand, laced their fingers together. But maybe she'd understand this. Us. Maybe she'd say, some things are worth the risk. They drove back toward his place, the afternoon sun slanting through the windshield, and Evelyn felt something settle in her chest. This was the complexity she'd been trying to understand. Not good or evil. Not hero or villain, but a man trying to build something meaningful in the spaces between violence and obligation. Thank you for showing me this, she said. Thank you for wanting to see it. Luca glanced at her. Most people in my life only care about the power, the connections, what I can do for them. You care about who I actually am. That's rare. You're worth caring about. Am I? Yes. Even when you break someone's nose for making threats, even when you scare me with how cold you can be, you're still worth it. They spent the rest of the day at his apartment, Evelyn working on her novel while Luca handled business calls that sounded notably less violent than usual. At one point, she overheard him talking about expanding the job training program, about investing in a youth boxing program that could keep kids off the streets. Small changes, maybe. But changes nonetheless. That evening, over dinner that Luca cooked with careful attention, Evelyn asked the question that had been building in her mind all day. What would it take for you to leave, to actually walk away from the family business? Luca set down his fork, considered. I don't know if I can. There are too many people depending on the income streams, too many obligations and debts I've inherited. If I just disappeared, the power vacuum would be catastrophic. But theoretically, if you could. Theoretically? He was quiet for a long moment. I'd need to ensure everyone who depends on me is provided for. I'd need to transition the legitimate businesses to trustworthy hands. I'd need to gradually reduce the illegal operations in a way that doesn't leave my people vulnerable or unemployed. He paused. It would take years, maybe a decade. But it's possible. Possible, yes. Probable? He shook his head. I don't know, Evelyn. I've been doing this half my life. It's all I know. You knew how to design buildings once. Luca's smile was bittersweet. That was a different lifetime. It doesn't have to be. He reached across the table, took her hand. Are you asking me to change for you? I'm asking if you want to change for yourself. I'm asking if the man who funds community centers and employs people no one else will hire might want something different than maintaining an empire built on fear. And if I said yes, if I said I want to try, then I'd help however I could. You barely know me, Evelyn. We've known each other 5 weeks. That's not enough time to make life-altering decisions. You're right. She squeezed his hand. It's not, but it's enough time to know if something is worth pursuing. And this, us, feels worth it to me. Does it feel worth it to you? Luca looked at her with such intensity, it was almost difficult to hold his gaze. Yes. God help me. Yes. Then we have time to figure out the rest. They finished dinner in comfortable silence, and afterward, Luca pulled her onto the couch, into his arms, and they talked late into the night about possibilities neither had allowed themselves to imagine before. About Evelyn's writing career, about Luca's architectural dreams, about a future that might look nothing like their present. It was fantasy, maybe. Wishful thinking. But it felt good to imagine, and that had to count for something. 3 days later, the Castellanos left Boston. Evelyn saw the news in the paper, a brief mention about a prominent family relocating to Miami for business opportunities. No mention of violence, no hint of the confrontation that had precipitated the move. Just a clean exit, exactly as Luca had demanded. When she called to tell him, his relief was palpable, even through the phone. It's really over? She asked. This particular threat? Yes. But there will be others, Evelyn. There always are. That's the nature of this life. I know. And you're still willing to stay? She thought about it honestly, about the fear and the danger and the very real possibility of more violence down the line. She thought about her quiet life before, her safe choices, her careful distance from anything that might hurt. Then she thought about Luca's hands bandaging her cold fingers with gentle care, about the community center full of people whose lives he'd quietly improved, about the way he looked at her like she was the most real thing in his carefully constructed world. "I'm still willing to try," she said. His exhale sounded like relief and reverence mixed together. "Then come here. Tonight. Let me make you dinner and show you the architectural designs I've been sketching when I can't sleep." "You've been sketching?" "You make me think about things I haven't let myself want in 15 years. So yes, I've been sketching. Terrible amateur sketches, but it feels like breathing after holding my breath too long." Evelyn smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. "I'll be there in an hour." She spent those precious 60 minutes finishing a chapter, one where her protagonist made the choice to stay, to fight for something complicated and dangerous and absolutely worth it. The words came easily now, flowing like truth she was finally brave enough to tell. When Marco picked her up, when she arrived at Luca's door, when he pulled her inside and kissed her like she was oxygen, all of it felt right in a way nothing in her life had felt right before. They looked at his sketches spread across the dining table, rough drawings of buildings with clean lines and thoughtful spaces, and Evelyn saw the ghost of the man he might have been if life had gone differently. "These are beautiful," she said. "They're dreams." "Dreams can become real if you work for them." Luca pulled her close, rested his chin on top of her head. "Maybe. With you here, maybe I can believe that." And standing there in his arms, surrounded by evidence of possible futures, Evelyn let herself believe it too. The next 8 weeks passed in a rhythm that felt almost normal, though Evelyn knew better than to trust the calm. She and Luca fell into patterns that blurred the lines between her life and his until she couldn't remember where one ended and the other began. She kept her apartment but rarely slept there. Most nights found her at Luca's place, writing in his library while he worked, their separate tasks creating a comfortable parallel existence that merged when the work was done. Her novel was nearly finished now, 70,000 words of complicated truth disguised as fiction, and her agent, secured through a connection Luca had quietly arranged, was already excited about the manuscript. "You didn't have to do that," Evelyn had said when Luca admitted he'd made an introduction. "I wanted to. Your writing deserves to be seen." He'd smiled at her surprise. "Besides, I'm selfish. The sooner you're published, the sooner I can tell people my girlfriend is a novelist." Girlfriend. The word had settled over her like a warm coat, comfortable and claiming in equal measure. But comfortable didn't mean easy. Luca's world kept intruding in ways both small and significant. The security detail that followed her everywhere. The careful way Luca's associates treated her, like she was something precious and potentially dangerous. The nights when he came home late with tension in his shoulders and blood on his clothes that he pretended she didn't notice. They didn't talk about those nights. Evelyn wasn't sure if that was healthy or cowardly, but she let it slide because Luca was changing in other ways that mattered more. He was investing more in the legitimate businesses, pulling back from some of the darker operations. Not quickly, not completely, but steadily, like a ship turning slowly to avoid a reef. It was progress. It had to be enough. Then came the night that shattered their fragile equilibrium completely. Evelyn was alone at Luca's apartment, having sent Marco home because she just needed space, needed to breathe without someone watching her every move. Luca was at a meeting across town, something about real estate development that he'd said would run late. She'd settled into the library with her laptop, determined to finish the novel's final chapter. The knock on the door came just after 10. Evelyn frowned, closing her laptop. Luca had a key. Marco would have called first. She moved to the door, checked the peephole, and saw a woman she didn't recognize, older, maybe 60, well-dressed, with the kind of face that had once been beautiful and was now elegantly weathered. "Can I help you?" Evelyn called through the door. "I'm looking for Luca De Lorenzo. I'm his aunt, Isabella." The woman's voice was cultured, certain. "Is he home?" Something prickled at the back of Evelyn's neck. Luca had never mentioned an aunt. But the woman looked harmless, and she had the same dark eyes as Luca, the same strong bone structure. Evelyn opened the door, keeping the chain engaged. "He's not here. Can I give him a message?" Isabella's gaze moved over her with sharp assessment. "You must be Evelyn, the writer he's been seeing." "How did you know that?" "I make it my business to know what family is doing. May I come in? I promise I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to speak with my nephew about a family matter." Every instinct screamed at Evelyn to refuse, to call Luca, to not let this stranger into his private space. But curiosity won, the same curiosity that had made her accept that first dance. She unlatched the chain and stepped back. Isabella entered with the easy confidence of someone used to being welcomed everywhere. She moved through the apartment like she knew it, her gaze lingering on familiar objects, and Evelyn realized she probably did know it. This woman was family, after all. "Can I offer you something to drink?" Evelyn asked, defaulting to manners when she didn't know what else to do. "Whiskey, if Luca still keeps the good bottle in the library." They moved to the library, Isabella settling into Luca's favorite chair like she belonged there, and Evelyn poured 2 glasses of whiskey with hands that wanted to shake. "How long have you known my nephew?" Isabella asked, accepting the glass. "Almost 3 months. And he's told you about the family business, I assume? About who we are and what we do?" Evelyn sat carefully on the couch across from her. "He's been honest with me, yes." "Has he?" Isabella's smile was knowing. "Has he told you about his father? About the promises Luca made when Antonio died?" "Some of it." "Did he tell you that Antonio didn't die of a heart attack? That he was killed by rivals who thought the De Lorenzo family was weak because Antonio had gotten soft in his old age?" The whiskey turned bitter in Evelyn's mouth. "No, he said it was a heart attack." Technically true. His heart stopped after he was beaten so badly his ribs punctured his lungs. Isabella took a sip of her drink, her expression carefully neutral. "Luca found him. Did he tell you that? He came home from his architecture program and found his father bleeding out in this very library." Evelyn felt sick. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to understand what you're asking him to give up. The rumors have reached me, you see, that Luca is pulling back from family business, that he's investing in legitimate ventures, that he's talking about changing the direction of the family." Isabella leaned forward. "That he's doing all this because of you. I never asked him to change anything. Didn't you? By existing, by making him want something different, you asked everything of him." Isabella's voice sharpened. "Do you know what happens if Luca walks away? If he dismantles the power structure his father died to protect?" "He's not dismantling anything. He's just trying to build something better." "There is no better in this world, dear girl. There's only survival. And the moment Luca shows weakness, the moment he prioritizes his personal happiness over family obligations, we all become targets." Isabella set down her glass with deliberate care. "I loved my brother. I watched him build an empire that kept hundreds of people employed and safe. I watched him die because he made the mistake of caring too much about appearing legitimate. And I will not watch Luca make the same mistake." Evelyn's heart was pounding. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm educating you. There's a difference." Isabella stood, smoothed her skirt. "You seem like a nice girl. Intelligent, genuine. I understand why Luca is drawn to you, but you're also a distraction he can't afford. Not now. Not when there are still enemies circling, waiting for any sign of weakness." "So what are you suggesting?" "That you make a choice. Either commit completely to this life, understanding that it will never be safe, never be simple, and that Luca will always carry the weight of obligations that predate you and will outlast you, or walk away before you both get hurt." Isabella moved toward the door, paused. "He won't make this choice himself. He cares about you too much, so it has to come from you." Then she was gone, leaving Evelyn alone in the library with her racing thoughts and the taste of whiskey turning to ash. When Luca came home an hour later, he found Evelyn exactly where Isabella had left her, staring at nothing, her mind cycling through everything the older woman had said. "Hey," Luca's voice was warm, concerned. "I tried calling. Why didn't you answer?" "Your aunt was here." He went very still. "What?" "Isabella. She said she was your aunt. She wanted to talk to you about family business, but she talked to me instead." Luca's expression transformed, warmth draining into something cold and furious. "What did she say to you?" "The truth, apparently. About your father, about how he really died." Evelyn looked up at him. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it wasn't relevant." "Wasn't relevant? Luca, you found your father beaten to death. That's not something you just neglect to mention." "What was I supposed to say?" His voice rose slightly, control slipping. That my father died violently because he tried to go legitimate? That watching him bleed out in this room is what convinced me I could never escape this life? That every time I think about walking away, I see his face and remember what happens to De Lorenzos who show weakness. The pain in his voice cracked something open in Evelyn's chest. She stood, cross to him, but he stepped back before she could touch him. Isabella had no right to tell you any of that, he said. Maybe not, but she wasn't wrong about one thing. I don't fully understand what I'm asking of you, what it costs you to try to be different. You're not asking anything of me. I'm choosing this. Are you? Or are you trying to be someone you think I'll love more? Lucas stared at her, the question hanging between them like a blade. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. I'm trying to be someone I can live with. Someone who doesn't wake up every morning wondering if today's the day I become my father, dead because I cared about the wrong things, or alive because I stopped caring about anything at all. That's not a choice you have to make. Isn't it? He laughed, bitter. Every day I make choices between what's right and what's necessary, between protecting the people I'm responsible for and building something better. And every single day I fail at balancing those things. Then stop trying to balance them. Choose. Choose what? Choose the life you actually want. Not the one you inherited, not the one you think you owe your father, the one you want. Lucas shook his head. It's not that simple. Why not? Because walking away means abandoning everyone who depends on me. It means leaving a power vacuum that will turn violent. It means potentially getting killed myself by people who see my exit as betrayal. His hands clenched at his sides. I can't just choose, Evelyn. The consequences are too big. So you're trapped. Yes. The single word fell like a stone between them. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes, frustration and heartbreak mixing into something painful and impossible to contain. Then what are we doing? She asked quietly. If you're trapped in this life, if there's no way out, what's the point of us? The point is that you make it bearable. The point is that loving you reminds me there's still something good in the world worth protecting. I don't want to be the thing that makes your prison bearable, Luca. I want to be the reason you find the door. They stared at each other, the space between them feeling vast despite only being a few feet. Evelyn could see the war happening behind Luca's eyes. Want versus obligation, love versus fear, the future versus the past. I'm trying, he said finally. I know it's not fast enough. I know it's not dramatic or definitive, but I'm trying to find a way out that doesn't destroy everything I'm responsible for. How long will that take? I don't know. Years, maybe. And what happens to us in those years? Do we just exist in this limbo, waiting for a future that might never come? I don't know, Luca admitted, and the helplessness in his voice made Evelyn want to hold him and shake him in equal measure. She moved to the window, looked out at Boston glittering below. 3 months ago, she'd been invisible, drowning in debt, her life small and safe and ultimately empty. Now she was in love with a man who lived in shadows, fighting for a future neither of them could quite envision. Isabella said I needed to choose, Evelyn said without turning around. Either commit completely to this life or walk away. And what did you decide? She turned to face him, this beautiful, complicated, impossibly burdened man who'd walked into her life and turned it inside out. I decided she was wrong. Those aren't the only options. What's the third option? We build it together. Not your life or my life, but our life. Something that doesn't require you to give up all your obligations overnight, but also doesn't trap me in a world I didn't choose. She moved closer to him. We find the middle ground, Luca, and we do it as partners, not as a prisoner and his visitor. Hope flickered across his face, tentative and fragile. You think that's possible? I think anything is possible if we're honest about what we want and what we can actually give. She finally closed the distance between them, took his hands. But you have to be honest with me. No more hidden truths, no more protecting me from reality. If we're going to do this, I need to know everything. Luca pulled her into his arms, held her so tightly she could barely breathe. Everything, he agreed. I promise. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the library where Luca's father had died, where the weight of legacy and obligation was almost visible in the air. When they finally pulled apart, Luca took her hand and led her to the couch. "Ask me anything," he said. "Everything you want to know, everything I should have told you. I'll answer honestly." So Evelyn asked about his father's death, about the empire he'd inherited, about the violence he'd committed and ordered, about the people he'd hurt and the choices that kept him awake at night, about his fears and his hopes and the dreams he'd buried so deep he'd almost forgotten they existed. And Luca answered, all of it. The ugly truths and the complicated realities and the human cost of power maintained through fear. He told her about the first time he'd killed someone, in self-defense, but it still haunted him. About the money laundering operations he was gradually shutting down. About the legitimate businesses he was expanding, trying to create enough legal income to eventually support everyone on the payroll. "It's like turning a ship," he said. "You can't just spin the wheel hard and hope for the best. You have to turn gradually, carefully, or everyone goes overboard." "How long will it take to complete the turn?" 5 years, maybe. If everything goes perfectly, which it won't. "And in 5 years, what will your life look like?" Luca considered, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Ideally, mostly legitimate businesses. Enough legal income to support everyone. Maybe some security consulting work for the people who are too deep in the old life to transition completely. Nothing that requires violence or looking over my shoulder constantly." "And what about us? What do we look like in 5 years?" He met her eyes directly. "Married, if you'll have me. Living somewhere quieter than this, maybe with a dog and a garden and the space to breathe without constantly calculating threats." His voice softened. "Maybe with you published and successful, writing the complicated stories only you can tell. Maybe with me designing buildings again, something small to start, but real." The vision he painted was so clear, so achingly hopeful, that Evelyn felt tears slip down her cheeks. "That sounds nice," she whispered. "It does, doesn't it?" Luca wiped her tears with gentle thumbs. "The question is whether you can wait 5 years for it, whether you can handle the mess between now and then." Evelyn thought about it seriously, weighing her own capacity for patience against the reality of loving someone whose life was measured in threats and obligations and gradual change. "I can't promise I'll make it 5 years," she said honestly, "but I can promise to try. One day at a time, one choice at a time, as long as you keep being honest with me." "I can do that. And as long as you actually move toward that future, not just talk about it." "I'm already moving toward it, Evelyn, slowly but steadily. You've made me believe it's possible." They kissed then, soft and sweet and full of promises that felt more solid than any they'd made before. When they finally went to bed, they didn't make love, but simply held each other, talking until dawn about the life they wanted to build. The next morning, Luca made a phone call that changed everything. Evelyn was making coffee when she heard him in the office, his voice carrying despite the closed door. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was different, decisive, final, like he was drawing a line he couldn't uncross. When he emerged 20 minutes later, his expression was resolute. "I just told my Aunt Isabella that I'm transitioning out of the family business over the next 5 years. That she and the other senior members can either support the transition or find new leadership." Evelyn almost dropped her coffee mug. "You what?" "I made a choice, the one you've been waiting for me to make." He crossed to her, took her hands. "I'm not walking away tomorrow. The transition will take time, and it won't be easy, but I'm committed to it now, publicly, to the family. No more ambiguity." "Luca, are you sure? What if they fight me? What if some people leave? What if there's backlash?" He smiled, and it was the freest expression she'd seen on his face. "Then we'll handle it, together. But I'm done living in fear of consequences that might never come. I'm done letting my father's death determine my future." Evelyn set down her coffee, wrapped her arms around his neck. "This is really happening. This is really happening." He lifted her off her feet, spun her once, his laugh surprised and genuine. "I'm terrified and exhilarated, and I have no idea if I'm making the right choice, but it's my choice. Finally." They spent the rest of the morning making plans, practical ones, about which businesses to prioritize, which operations to shut down first, how to handle the people whose livelihoods depended on the illegal income streams. It was complicated and messy and would require years of careful navigation. But it was possible. Impossibility was more than either of them had believed in 3 months ago. That afternoon, Evelyn finished her novel. The final chapter wrote itself, her protagonist choosing neither safety nor surrender, but partnership, building a life in the space between light and shadow, complicated and imperfect and absolutely worth fighting for. She saved the file, closed her laptop, and found Luca in the library with his sketchbook open, drawing what looked like a small house with large windows and a garden. "Is that for us?" she asked. "Maybe. Someday." He looked up, saw something in her expression. "What?" "I finished it, the book. It's done." Luca's face lit up. "Evelyn, that's incredible. Can I read it?" "Eventually, after my agent sees it first, after I work up the courage to let it out into the world." "You'll do it. You're braver than you think." She settled beside him on the couch, leaned against his shoulder, looked at the sketch of their hypothetical future. "We're really doing this, aren't we? Building something new. We're really doing this. I'm scared." "Me too." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." And there, in the library where so much pain had happened, where Luca's father had died and Luca's dreams had been buried, they began building something different. Not perfect, not simple, but theirs. The weeks that followed were harder than Evelyn had anticipated. Luca's announcement sent shockwaves through the family structure. Some supported the transition, understanding that the world was changing and legitimacy was safer long-term. Others fought him, seeing his plans as betrayal of everything the De Lorenzos had built. There were meetings that ran until 3 in the morning, heated arguments Evelyn could hear through closed doors. Threats that Luca handled with the same cold efficiency he'd always possessed, except now the violence was a last resort rather than a first response. Isabella, surprisingly, became an ally. She disagreed with Luca's timeline, thought 5 years was too aggressive, but she respected his commitment. More importantly, she used her influence with the older generation to smooth resistance. "You remind me of someone I used to know," she told Evelyn one evening when she stopped by with documents for Luca to review. "A woman who loved my brother before the life hardened him. She had your same stubborn optimism." "What happened to her?" "She married him anyway, 37 years together before he died. Some of them were beautiful, some of them were brutal, but she never regretted the choice." Isabella's smile was sad. "Love in this life isn't easy, Evelyn, but it's worth it if you're strong enough to hold on." Evelyn thought about that conversation often in the following months as she navigated her new reality. Her novel sold at auction, a development that felt surreal and validating and terrifying. Her agent was thrilled, her editor enthusiastic, and suddenly Evelyn had deadlines and publicity plans and a career that was actually happening. Luca was proud of her in ways that made her chest ache, showing her book cover designs to anyone who would look, planning a launch party, encouraging her to embrace success without diminishing herself. "This is yours," he said when she worried she was taking too much attention. "You earned this. Be proud." So she was. Proud and grateful and constantly amazed that her life had transformed so completely in less than a year. They moved in together officially, Evelyn giving up her apartment to live in Luca's brownstone full-time. It felt like a statement, a commitment, a choice that solidified what they were building together. Some nights were still hard. Luca still came home late with tension in his shoulders. There were still moments when the weight of his obligations threatened to crush him, when he questioned whether he could actually execute the transition he'd promised. But those moments became less frequent as the months passed, as businesses were sold or restructured, as illegal operations were carefully dismantled, as the empire transformed inch by painful inch into something that could exist in daylight. And through it all, Evelyn wrote. A second novel, different from the first but no less honest. Stories about complicated people making difficult choices, about love that survived in hostile environments, about the possibility of change even when it seemed impossible. She was writing their story, she realized. Over and over, in different forms, she was documenting this transformation, not for posterity, but because it was the only way she knew how to process the enormity of what they were attempting. 1 year after that first dance in the glittering ballroom, Luca took Evelyn back to the same hotel for another charity gala. This time, she didn't feel out of place. She wore a dress that actually fit. Her confidence earned rather than performed. And when Luca asked her to dance, she said yes without hesitation. "Remember this night last year?" he murmured as they swayed together. "How could I forget? You changed my entire life." "We changed each other's lives," he corrected. "You made me believe change was possible. I'm just trying to live up to that belief." Evelyn looked up at him, this man who'd terrified and fascinated her in equal measure, who'd shown her depths of both darkness and light she'd never imagined. "Are you happy?" "Getting there." His smile was genuine. "Ask me again in 4 years." "I will," she promised, and meant it. The promise Evelyn made that night took on weight as the years unfolded, each one bringing its own challenges and small victories that accumulated into something larger than either of them had dared to imagine. Her second novel published 18 months after the first, and this time the critical reception was even stronger. Reviews called her work unflinching and compassionate, praised her ability to write morally complex characters without judgment. Readers connected with her stories in ways that felt both validating and terrifying. People saw themselves in her protagonists, saw their own impossible choices reflected back. Luca attended every reading, every book event, standing at the back of crowded bookstores with unmistakable pride on his face. He never drew attention to himself, never leveraged his connections to promote her work, understanding instinctively that this success needed to be purely hers. "You're glowing," he said after one particularly well-attended signing in Cambridge. "I'm exhausted," Evelyn corrected, but she was smiling as she said it. "Exhausted and glowing. It's a good look on you." He took her hand as they walked to the car, Marco waiting patiently at the curb. "Your mother called today, by the way." Evelyn's smile faded. Her mother had been a complicated presence in her life since the books were published. Proud but bewildered, supportive but unable to understand why Evelyn wrote such dark stories, why she'd chosen to stay with a man whose reputation preceded him. "What did she want?" "To tell me she's reading your second book. She said it's making her think about her own choices differently." Luca's expression was carefully neutral. She also asked if we were planning to visit Florida anytime soon. "Are we?" "Only if you want to." Evelyn thought about it. About the mother who'd remarried and moved away, who called twice a year out of obligation but was trying, in her own awkward way, to bridge the distance. "Maybe next month, brief visit." "I'll arrange it." He squeezed her hand. "Family is complicated, but it's worth the effort, even when it's uncomfortable." The irony wasn't lost on Evelyn. Luca, who'd spent years managing a criminal family, giving her advice about navigating normal familial relationships. But he was right. Complicated didn't mean hopeless. They made the trip to Florida 3 weeks later, a long weekend that was exactly as awkward as Evelyn had anticipated. Her mother fussed over Luca, clearly charmed by his manners and slightly intimidated by his presence. Her stepfather was polite but distant, uncertain how to relate to either of them. But there were moments of genuine connection, too. Her mother reading passages from the novel aloud, asking questions about the characters' motivations. Luca and her stepfather discovering a shared love of fishing, spending an afternoon on a charter boat while Evelyn and her mother talked on the beach. "You seem happy," her mother said, watching Evelyn watch Luca on the distant boat. "I am." "Even with everything? Even knowing what his life is like?" Evelyn considered her answer carefully. "His life is changing. We're changing it together. It's not perfect, and it's not fast, but it's real." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. "I was wrong about you, you know. When you were younger, I thought you were too cautious, too afraid to take risks, but you're braver than I ever was." The admission surprised Evelyn enough that she turned to look at her mother directly. "What do you mean?" "I played it safe my whole life. Safe choices, safe relationships, safe everything. And I ended up with a safe, small life that I'm not sure I even recognize anymore." She gestured toward the water. "You chose something difficult and complicated, and you're building something real from it. That takes courage I never had." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you for saying that. Thank you for showing me it's possible." They flew back to Boston the next day. and Evelyn felt something settle in her chest. Not resolution exactly, but acceptance. Her relationship with her mother would always be complicated, but complicated didn't mean broken. The pattern held true for so much of her life now. Complicated but functional. Difficult, but worth it. Luca's transition continued, slower than he'd hoped, but steadier than anyone had expected. By the third year, nearly 60% of the family's income came from legitimate sources. The construction company was thriving. The restaurants were expanding. The real estate portfolio was impressive and entirely legal. The remaining 40% was harder. Some operations couldn't be easily dismantled without leaving people vulnerable. Some associates couldn't transition to legitimate work, their skills too specialized or their records too problematic. Luca spent countless hours finding solutions, placing people in positions where they could earn legally, setting up retirement packages for those who needed to exit entirely. "I'm playing chess with people's lives," he told Evelyn one night, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "And I'm terrified I'm going to make a move that ruins someone." "You're doing your best. That's all anyone can ask." "Is it enough?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but it's more than most people would even attempt." There were setbacks. A former associate who couldn't adjust to legitimate work and got arrested for running an independent operation. A business deal that fell through, costing jobs and forcing difficult restructuring. Threats from outside families who saw the De Lorenzo transition as opportunity to move into abandoned territory. Luca handled each crisis with the same careful strategy he'd always employed, but Evelyn could see the toll it took. The weight of responsibility that never quite lifted. The fear that one wrong choice would unravel everything they'd built. She supported him the only way she knew how, by being present, by listening when he needed to talk, by giving him space when he needed to think, by reminding him, on the hardest days, why they were doing this. 4 years, she said one particularly difficult evening when he'd come home late and defeated. "We said 5 years. We're almost there. And if we're not done in 4 years? If it takes longer, then it takes longer. But we keep moving forward. Together." He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. "I don't deserve you." "You deserve to be happy, Luca. We both do. And we're building that, one impossible day at a time." The breakthrough came in year 4, unexpected and transformative. A former federal prosecutor who'd been investigating the De Lorenzo family for years reached out through intermediaries. She wanted to meet with Luca, off the record, to discuss a possible arrangement. Evelyn was in the room when he took the call, watched his expression shift from suspicion to cautious interest. "What kind of arrangement?" he asked. The answer came through speakerphone, professional and precise. "We've been watching your transition, Mr. De Lorenzo. We're impressed by the progress. If you're willing to provide information about remaining criminal operations, not your own family but the networks you're connected to, we might be able to offer protection and legitimacy in return." "You want me to be an informant?" "We want you to be a partner in dismantling organized crime in Boston. There's a difference." Luca looked at Evelyn, a question in his eyes. She nodded slowly, understanding what he was asking. This was the final door, the one that would close the old life completely and irrevocably. "I need guarantees," Luca said. "For my people, for my family, for everyone who's dependent on the remaining operations. I won't trade their safety for mine." "We can work with that. Let's meet." The meeting happened 3 days later in a neutral location with lawyers present. The federal prosecutor, a woman named Sarah Chen, who Evelyn instantly respected, laid out a proposal that was both generous and demanding. In exchange for detailed information about criminal networks, shipping routes, money laundering operations, and corrupt officials, the government would grant immunity to the De Lorenzo family for past crimes and provide support for complete legitimization. "This is unprecedented," Sarah said, "but we're willing to make an exception because you've already done most of the work yourself. We're just accelerating the timeline." Luca read through the documents carefully, asking questions that demonstrated exactly how intelligent and strategic he was. Evelyn sat beside him, occasionally squeezing his hand when the weight of what they were discussing became too heavy. "If I do this, people will consider it betrayal," Luca said finally. "There will be consequences. We'll provide protection, relocation if necessary." "I don't want to relocate. This is my city." Then we'll ensure you can stay safely. But Mr. De Lorenzo, you need to understand, once you cross this line, there's no going back. You'll be permanently outside the world you grew up in. Luca looked at Evelyn, really looked at her, and she saw the question he was asking without words. Was this what she wanted? Was this the future she'd been hoping for? Yes, she said quietly. This is it. This is the door. He turned back to Sarah Chen. I need 48 hours to discuss this with my family, to prepare them. Then I'll give you my answer. Those 48 hours were the longest of Evelyn's life. Luca met with Isabella, with his senior associates, with the people whose lives would be most affected by his decision. Some understood, some raged, some simply looked tired, like they'd been waiting for this moment since the transition began. Isabella's response surprised everyone. Do it, she told Luca in a meeting Evelyn attended at Isabella's insistence. Your father tried to go legitimate, and it killed him because he did it wrong, too slowly, too visibly, making himself vulnerable without making himself safe. This way, you have protection. This way, you can actually finish what you started. You're sure? I'm old, Luca. I've seen enough violence, enough funerals, enough lives destroyed by this business. If you can end it for our family, if you can give the next generation a choice we never had, then you take that deal. Isabella's expression was fierce. And you don't look back. The next morning, Luca called Sarah Chen and accepted the deal. The following 6 months were a controlled chaos of debriefings, negotiations, and careful dismantling. Luca provided information that led to 17 arrests, shut down 3 major trafficking operations, and exposed corruption that had existed for decades. The federal government kept its promises. Immunity for the De Lorenzo family, protection during the transition, support for legitimizing the remaining businesses. Evelyn watched Luca transform during those months. The weight he'd carried for 15 years gradually lifted, replaced by something that looked like hope. He smiled more easily, slept better, started sketching buildings again, not just as fantasy but as actual projects he was considering. I'm thinking about going back to school, he told her one evening as they walked along the harbor, the same route they'd walked the night he first kissed her. Finishing my architecture degree, maybe starting small, designing community spaces, things that matter. You should do it. I'm 42 years old, Evelyn. I'd be the oldest student in every class. So, you'd also be the most motivated, she squeezed his hand. Besides, I think Professor De Lorenzo has a nice ring to it. He laughed, the sound free and genuine. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But maybe. Someday. They walked in comfortable silence, and Evelyn marveled at how far they'd come. From that first dance in a glittering ballroom to this moment, walking hand in hand toward a future that finally felt possible. I have something for you, Luca said, stopping suddenly. What? He pulled a small box from his pocket, and Evelyn's heart stopped completely. I know we've talked about this, he said, opening the box to reveal a ring. Simple, elegant, perfect. I know I said I'd wait until the transition was complete, but we're almost there, Evelyn. We're so close to the life we wanted to build, and I don't want to wait anymore. Evelyn stared at the ring, tears already streaming down her face. Marry me, Luca said. And it wasn't quite a question, but it wasn't quite a command either. It was an invitation, an offering, a promise of partnership. Marry me and let's finish building this life together, officially, permanently, completely. Yes, Evelyn managed through tears. Yes, of course, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like everything about them. Complicated and imperfect, but exactly right. They kissed there on the harbor walk, and Evelyn felt something fundamental click into place. This was real. This was happening. They'd survived the impossible and come out the other side stronger. The wedding was small, intimate, exactly what they both wanted. Just close friends, family who'd supported the transition, and Isabella who cried through the entire ceremony despite her protests that she never cried. Evelyn wore a simple dress, no veil, no pretense. Luca wore a suit that made him look distinguished and slightly nervous, his vows delivered with the same intensity he brought to everything he did. I promise to build with you, not for you, he said, holding both her hands. I promise to be honest even when it's hard. I promise to choose you every day in every way that matters. And I promise that the life we're building will be ours, not my past, not your expectations, but ours. Complicated and messy, and absolutely worth fighting for. Evelyn's vows were simpler, but no less meaningful. I promise to see all of you, the darkness and the light, the violence and the tenderness, the man you were and the man you're becoming. I promise to choose you too, even on the hard days, especially on the hard days. And I promise that whatever we build together will be built on truth, even when truth is uncomfortable. They were married by a judge who knew exactly who Luca was and married them anyway, because redemption was possible and love mattered more than history. The reception was at Sophia's restaurant, the same place Luca had taken Evelyn for their first real date. The food was extraordinary, the wine flowed freely, and for one perfect evening, everyone forgot about the complicated journey that had brought them here and just celebrated. Marco gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry. Isabella gave one that was surprisingly sentimental, and Evelyn's editor gave one that praised both her novels and her courage, making Evelyn blush and Luca beam with pride. To complicated love stories, the editor said, raising her glass. May they always have happy endings, even when we don't see them coming. To complicated love stories, everyone echoed. That night, in the hotel suite Luca had booked overlooking the city, they made love slowly and tenderly, whispering promises against each other's skin. Afterward, tangled together in expensive sheets, Luca traced the ring on Evelyn's finger. Mrs. De Lorenzo, he said, testing the sound. I'm keeping heart professionally, Evelyn reminded him. For the books. I know, but let me enjoy this moment of traditional claiming. She laughed, pressed closer. Claim away. As long as you remember, I'm claiming you right back. Deal. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and Evelyn dreamed of the house with large windows and a garden, the one from Luca's sketches. In the dream, it was real, and they were in it, building a life that had nothing to do with empire or obligation, and everything to do with choice. 6 months later, the transition was complete. The last of the illegal operations were shut down. The final associates placed in legitimate positions or retired with generous packages. The De Lorenzo family was clean, completely, officially, irrevocably legitimate. Sarah Chen called personally to confirm it. Congratulations, Mr. De Lorenzo. You're free. Free. The word echoed in Luca's mind long after the call ended. He was 43 years old and finally free of the weight he'd carried since he was 23. Free of his father's death and his grandfather's empire and the expectations that had defined him for 2 decades. He found Evelyn in their home office. They'd bought a house in Cambridge, something with space for both of them to work, typing away at her 3rd novel. It's done, he said from the doorway. She looked up, understanding immediately. Done? Completely. We're legitimate. We're safe. We're free. Evelyn saved her work, crossed to him, and wrapped her arms around his waist. How does it feel? Terrifying, like I should be waiting for the other shoe to drop. There is no other shoe. This is it. This is the life we built. Luca held her, let himself feel the truth of that. This was the life they'd built, through impossible choices and patient years, through setbacks and small victories, through love that refused to be simple or safe. I enrolled, he said suddenly. What? At MIT architecture program. Part-time, since I'm working too, but I start in September. Evelyn pulled back to look at his face, saw the mixture of excitement and fear there. Luca, that's incredible. I'm terrified I'll fail, that I've forgotten everything, that I'm too old for this. You're not too old. And even if you fail, which you won't, at least you tried. At least you chose what you wanted instead of what was expected. He kissed her, deep and grateful. I love you. Have I mentioned that recently? Not in the last hour. Unforgivable. I love you, Evelyn De Lorenzo Hart. Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Thank you for being worth believing in. The years that followed were quieter than the ones before, but no less meaningful. Luca threw himself into his studies with the same intensity he'd once applied to running an empire, staying up late over design projects, debating architectural philosophy with professors half his age. He thrived in ways Evelyn had hoped for, but never quite believed she'd see. The construction company he'd legitimized became his laboratory, allowing him to test his designs in real-world applications. He started small, a community center renovation, a park redesign, but each project was thoughtful and beautiful and utterly his. Evelyn's career continued to flourish. Her third novel won awards, her fourth was optioned for television. She became a voice in literary fiction, known for writing morally complex characters with compassion and unflinching honesty. Interviewers always asked about her inspiration, and she always said the same thing. She wrote about people making impossible choices because that was the only kind of story worth telling. She never mentioned Luca by name. That was their agreement. Her work was hers, his past was his, and the two didn't need to intersect publicly. But readers who paid attention could see the echoes, could recognize the themes of redemption and transformation that ran through everything she wrote. 5 years after their wedding, Luca graduated with his architecture degree. Evelyn sat in the audience with Isabella, both of them crying with pride as he walked across the stage. At 48, he was indeed the oldest graduate, but also the most grateful. That night, over champagne in their garden, they'd bought the house from Luca's sketches, turned it from dream to reality. He showed her his final project, the one he'd been working on for months. It was a design for a mixed-use development in the neighborhood where he'd grown up. Affordable housing, community spaces, small business incubators, all integrated in a way that honored the area's history while building toward its future. I want to call it the Antonio De Lorenzo Community Project, Luca said, after my father, a way of honoring what he tried to do, what he wanted to build before everything went wrong. Evelyn studied the drawings, the careful attention to detail, the way every element served both beauty and function. It's perfect. I don't know if I can get it funded. It's ambitious, probably too ambitious. You'll get it funded. You always find a way. He did. It took another 2 years of proposals and meetings and careful negotiation, but the project was approved and funded through a combination of city grants, private investment, and the De Lorenzo family's legitimate resources. Breaking ground felt like closing a circle, honoring the past while building the future. Evelyn wrote about it, of course. Not in a novel this time, but in an essay for a major magazine about second chances and complicated redemption. She used Luca's name, with his permission, telling their story honestly for the first time. The response was overwhelming. Some people criticized her for romanticizing a criminal's transformation. Others praised her for showing that change was possible even in the darkest circumstances. But most people just connected with the fundamental truth of the story, that love could be a catalyst for change, that people were capable of more than their worst choices, that building something better was hard but possible. No regrets? Luca asked after the essay published, holding her while they watched the sunset from their porch. About what? Any of it. Saying yes to that first dance, staying when you should have run, building this life with me. Evelyn thought about it honestly, about the fear and the danger and the impossibly complicated years, about the night she'd cried from frustration, the moments she'd doubted everything, the constant weight of loving someone whose life was built on contradictions. Then she thought about this moment, here in the house they'd built together, with his arms around her and their future spreading out before them like an open road. No regrets, she said. Not a single one. Even though it was hard, especially because it was hard, easy things don't change you. They don't make you grow. We grew together, Luca. We became better versions of ourselves because we refused to give up on each other. He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. You saved my life. You know that, right? Not metaphorically. Actually, if I hadn't met you, I'd still be trapped in that world, slowly dying inside, convinced that power was the same as purpose. You saved mine too. You made me believe my stories mattered. You made me brave enough to live a complicated life instead of a safe one. They sat together as the light faded, and Evelyn thought about that first night in the glittering ballroom, about the woman she'd been, invisible, drowning in debt, her dreams filed away as impractical. She thought about the moment Luca's hand had closed around hers, the choice she'd made to say yes despite every logical reason to refuse. That choice had led to this life, this love, this impossible, beautiful, complicated reality they'd built together. And she would make that choice again, every single time, in every possible version of her story. "What are you thinking about?" Luca asked. "Destiny," Evelyn said, "and choice, and how sometimes they're the same thing. Deep thoughts for a Tuesday evening. I'm a writer. Deep thoughts are my job." He laughed, pulled her closer. "What should we do tomorrow?" "Tomorrow, you work on the community project. I work on the new novel. And we keep building this life, one day at a time." Sounds perfect. And it was. Not perfect in the fairy tale sense, not without challenges or complicated moments or the occasional hard conversation, but perfect in the way that mattered, authentic, chosen, theirs. Years later, when Evelyn's sixth novel published, the one that was unambiguously their story, fiction only in the details, she dedicated it to Luca with words that captured everything they'd survived and built. "For Elle, who taught me that the most complicated stories are the ones most worth telling. Thank you for choosing to build something beautiful from impossible circumstances. Thank you for choosing me." The novel ended with two characters standing in a garden they'd created together, watching the sunset, discussing tomorrow's small plans with the understanding that small plans accumulated into transformed lives. Critics called it her most honest work yet. Readers said it gave them hope that their own complicated stories might have happy endings too. At the book launch, Luca stood at the back of the crowded bookstore the way he always did. But this time, when Evelyn called him forward, when she asked him to say a few words, he didn't refuse. "I'm not a writer," he said, slightly uncomfortable with the attention. "I build things, buildings now, not empires. But Evelyn builds things too, with words instead of blueprints. And the most important thing she ever built was the bridge that let me walk from who I was to who I could become." He looked directly at her. "Thank you for building that bridge. Thank you for walking across it with me. Thank you for believing it would hold." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. That night, back in their home, in the life they'd constructed from hope and hard work, Evelyn and Luca made love with the tenderness of long partnership. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, they talked about the future the way they always did. The next project, the next book, the small plans that would accumulate into years of shared life. "Do you think about that first night often?" Evelyn asked. "The gala, the dance, the moment everything changed?" "Sometimes. Mostly I think about what came after, the choice to keep choosing each other, even when it was hard." Luca traced patterns on her shoulder. "The dance was the beginning, but this, right here, this is the story, and I like our story exactly as it is." "Complicated and messy and worth fighting for?" "Exactly." Evelyn smiled in the darkness, feeling more content than she'd ever imagined possible. She'd come to that gala 5 years ago, invisible and desperate, looking for an opportunity she couldn't define. She'd found Luca instead, and through him, she'd found herself, the writer she was meant to be, the woman brave enough to build an impossible life. They fell asleep tangled together the way they always did, and in the morning they'd wake and continue building. Small choices, patient days, accumulated transformation. It wasn't destiny exactly. It was better. It was choice, made over and over again, until choice became their shared life. And in the end, that was the real love